What I was arguing for on the panel, and what I think is really interesting in my work, is that I'm trying to figure out the ways that the war on drugs actually was a really active factor in really broad renegotiations and transformations that happened in the post-war period. So we tend to tell the story of the rise of the right, of the rise of what some people are calling neoliberalism, about the declension of the welfare state, without the war on drugs being a sort of a central place where that influenced those transformations. And so that was what I was, that was one of the ways that I was thinking we should recommend, I was recommending that we rethink the war on drugs, really putting it in the center.
Oh, and how does that change our understanding of the war on drugs?
Well, what I was saying is that the war on drugs actually becomes a really important place for producing knowledge, for creating popular common sense about the limits of state power, and about sort of which people in society or candidates are viable, should have voice in society. And so that by getting tough on crime, which is, I think, obviously most people would agree is a central feature of the war on drugs, sort of punitive war on drugs, the political spectacle of getting tough on drug users communicated and entrenched a certain argument about marginalized people, about the fact that the state, that it was an inevitable failure, that efforts to rehabilitate drug users, that was an inevitably failed project, that marginal people that were poor or on the margins of society were just incapable of becoming normative, rights-bearing citizens, and that sort of failure of liberal treatment programs, that producing that narrative was actually really important in a whole host of further political moves, for instance, defunding them, for example.
Let's talk about Nelson Rockefeller.
Okay.
He was a big proponent of the war on drugs. He was kind of a liberal Republican. How do you explain that?
Well, I think it's sort of interesting actually to think about. People often sort of say that as an irony, that Rockefeller, isn't it ironic that this person who sort of lobbed the opening salvo in the modern punitive war on drugs was a liberal Republican? And actually, I think that if you really go in and look at the history of what happened in New York State, I don't think it is as much of an irony, because I think one of the reasons that he ended up being the person that advanced it is that he had been deeply politically implicated in a whole host of all these therapeutic programs, investing massive amounts of money to handle drug addiction and drug use, which had become very serious political problems for him in New York. And that he had invested all these resources and all this political capital in these programs that were becoming a political liability for him in various ways, that were being declared as failures in various ways, and that it was because he was so implicated in those that there was a motivation for him to get tough and sort of change course very dramatically and sort of sever the political liability.
So rather than it being an irony that a liberal Republican winds up championing the war on drugs, it's almost cause and effect. It's because he was a liberal Republican, the country was shifting right, he had to get to the right side of that issue.
Yeah, in part, yeah, I think that in part that was part of it, that he had been so implicated, he was trying to move right, and he had been so implicated in so many of the liberal treatment programs that he really, that there was a real political incentive for him to dramatically sever his ties to those programs and position himself as a tough drug warrior.
All right, one last question. Why didn't his liberal schemes work? What was wrong with them?
Oh,
the early Rockefeller versus later Rockefeller. What happened if we threw all this money at it? Why did he?
Oh, did I move?
Yeah, you moved a little bit. That's okay.
Sorry. There's a long answer to that question, but they didn't work politically. It's a whole separate conversation. There are various programmatic effects. So, methadone did have some, what Rockefeller could have claimed as positive responses, but he was in it. But they had become a political liability. These programs, they were controversial. They were expensive. They were attacked by. He was being attacked from the right. He was being attacked from the left on the basis of these programs. So I'm not sure, I think we actually really need to sort of pull apart the conversation of their programmatic effectiveness from the sort of political challenges that they wrote.
Are our answers to the drug problem today substantially different from Rockefeller's original liberal Rockefeller's answers?
What do you mean, meaning that should we have
Were his, I mean, it seems like now when you read the news and they talk about, hey, we've got people who are on drugs, don't put them in jail, you've got to put them through treatment. It sounds like the liberal Rockefeller's original approach was the right approach.
Exactly. Well, I think that one of the things that's really interesting about the Rockefeller drug laws and the moment, and the historical moment that in general, is that a lot of those debates ended up really structuring our arguments about how the state should respond to drugs around this what really is actually kind of a pretty narrow set of state responses, structuring the entire conversation between treatment and punishment in a way that there's actually, at the time and even now, there's a much broader sort of range of solutions. And so I think we operate within a lot of the political discourse operates within the confines of the same sort of political structure, which is that these are binaries, that those are the only two choices, when of course there's been harm reduction strategies, there's folks that talk about legalization, there's folks that talk about maybe abstinence isn't the only drug response, the only sort of thing that the state should pursue.
Thank you.